While working on the film Dr. Strangelove, Stanley Kubrick wasn't sure what direction the film should go, and given the tone of the story of which it was based on, that being the book Red Alert, a thriller set during the Cold War about a general who launched an unauthorized nuclear attack on the Soviet Union, the further Kubrick got into the production process, he realized that this film should probably be a dark comedy and not a thriller. While the film, for the most part, stays in line with the source material, the film has been analyzed multiple times and by multiple different critics and from multiple different angles. But I've always felt that the best assessment, and not just on the film itself, but also the rest of the title, that there of course being How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, was really Kubrick making fun of the possibility of a dick measuring contest between what was at the time the two chief nations of the world, that of course being the US and the Soviet Union, and of course also the Cold War. Now, before I give you guys my analysis on this film, I want to go ahead and state that this will not be a historical breakdown, even though an event from history is referenced in this video. But this video is meant more to illustrate what the real purpose and meaning of the film was. Now with that out of the way, if you guys can, please hit that like button. Please consider sticking around for the full video. Also, please consider subscribing. Let's make this channel a little bit bigger. And most importantly, thank you guys for watching. And let's talk about Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. As stated before, the film is really just Kubrick making fun of well, let's just say a fictional dick measuring contest between the Soviet Union and the United States. But more importantly, around the general who launches the unauthorized attack in this film. That, of course, being General Ripper.
Communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
Ripper has come to the conclusion that through the process of fluoridation, the Soviets are responsible for his impotence, and he concocts that this fluoridation, or the poisoning of the U.S. water supply, and yes, sexual references are a theme in a lot of Kubrick films, but it's never the dominant theme. But he's authorized our B-52 crew that we follow throughout the film to strike the Soviet Union, and also at the same time, the base that Ripper is at is currently getting attacked by an enemy that he quite frankly does not know who it is. But still, it's a crazy film and the humor gets crazier. Basically, every interaction in this film is a dick measuring contest. Of course, there's a dick measuring contest going on between Ripper and even Mandrake, who's played by Peter Sellers, who plays 3 characters in this film. Don't worry, we'll get to each one individually over the course of this video essay. There's also a dick measuring contest between Mandrake and the Colonel, who eventually apprehends him at the end of the film. And of course, there's also the dick measuring contest, which I think is the most predominant dick measuring contest in this film. Not so much between the Soviet Union and the United States, but more between General Turgedson, played by George C. Scott, who, believe it or not, looked way older 5 years later while filming Patton, and the President, of course, who's played by Peter Sellers. But the film is really designed to make fun of the people in the room, making the decisions that could affect all of our lives and showcase how stupid people can be given the pressure of the moment, or basically just making fun of the people in charge. Now gang, at the beginning of the video I did mention a historical event, and that of course would be the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. Turgedson is clearly based off General Curtis LeMay, who was urging President Kennedy to use surgical strikes in Cuba, taking the missiles out so that way it would not be a problem, and then eventually going to the United Nations with the proof that the Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles 90 miles off the U.S. coast. General LeMay, a lot like General Turgedson, viewed this as taking out a threat before the threat got much, much larger. Of course, the president in this film is based on President Kennedy, who was looking for an alternative way to deal with the Soviet Union.
That was not an act of national policy, and there are still alternatives left open to us.
Mr. President, we are rapidly approaching a moment of truth, both for ourselves as human beings and for the life of our nation. Now, truth is not always a pleasant thing. But it is necessary now to make a choice, to choose between 2 admittedly regrettable, but nevertheless distinguishable post-war environments. One where you got 20 million people killed, and the other where you got 150 million people killed.
You're talking about mass murder, General, not war.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
I will not go down in history as the greatest mass murderer since Adolf Hitler.
Perhaps it might be better, Mr. President, if you were more concerned with the American people than with your image in the history books.
General Turgedson, I think I've heard quite sufficient from you. Thank you very much.
As you guys heard right there, the president cares a lot about his place in history, and I think that that's actually what Stanley Kubrick was trying to make fun of. But then again, at the same time, like I said, I don't want to turn this into a historical breakdown. There are other YouTube channels out there that have covered this particular event, that of course being the Cuban Missile Crisis. Whoever you think is right or whoever you thought was wrong, that right there is strictly up to you guys. And if you want to talk about it in the comment section, I'll be right there with you talking about the incident. But still, thank God no nukes were fired, and thank God we are obviously here today talking about this film. And before we fully move forward, and I apologize, some will argue that the president in this film is not based on Kennedy. Like I said before, for obvious reasons, they don't look alike. But let's be real, all politicians, especially presidents, they care about their place in history. But now we can move on. The reason for the strike on the Soviets is stupid to begin with, and Ripper is ultimately surrounded not by the Soviets, but by the U.S. military itself, as said before. There's this very entertaining back and forth between Ripper and Mandrake. I figured I'd throw this out here before we move any further, so that way you guys can kind of see what really ails Ripper.
Mandrake, you realize that in addition to fluoridating water, where there are studies underway to fluoridate salt, flour, fruit juices, soup, sugar, milk, ice cream, Mandrake, children's ice cream.
Good. You know when fluoridation first began?
No, I don't yet.
1946. 1946, Mandrake. How does that coincide with your post-war commie conspiracy? It's incredibly obvious, isn't it?
When the situation turns on its head against General Ripper, it's almost like it suddenly dawns on him that what he was believing was absolutely insane, especially in those last moments, as Mandrake sort of explains to him that, yeah, I've been drinking water for a very long time, and that, this entire situation was absolutely insane and not exactly based in the realm of reality.
And I drink a lot of water, you know. I'm what you might call a water man, Jack. That's what I am. And I can swear to you, my boy, swear to you, that there's nothing wrong with my bodily fluids. Not a thing, Jackie.
Mandrake, were you
Yes.
ever a prisoner of war?
Well, Jack, the time's running very...
Prisoner of war?
Ultimately, Ripper feels guilt. In a moment of reflection, he tells Mandrake, and not directly, that he knows what he has done and that he knows that there is a place in the afterlife for him. Still, the point is this man's craziness because he couldn't get a hard-on is what sort of led to this event. Like I said before, it's a dark comedy, it's satire, it's designed to make fun of the people involved and the people who would be involved in a scenario like this. I mean, even the Soviets in a lot of ways make fun of their own leader in this film. This right here, of course, through the character who plays the Soviet ambassador.
Try B86543 Moscow.
Yes, sir.
You would never have found him through his office, Mr. President. Our premier is a man of the people, but he is also a man, if you follow my meaning.
You can take this as the Soviet premier being a drunk, or you could take this as him being involved with a woman, seeing how it is there's this scene earlier in the film with General Turgedson being involved with his secretary. More on that a little bit later. However, ultimately, General Ripper ends himself. And eventually, the commanding colonel shows up to take Mandrake in, and this, of course, leads to one of the funnier sequences in the film, while Mandrake is trying to get the codes over to the Situation Room to prevent what's going on, especially given the fact that the communications has been knocked out on the B-52 that's carrying the payload to the Soviet Union via another missile.
That's private property.
Colonel, can you possibly imagine what is going to happen to you, your frame, outlook, way of life, and everything, when they learn that you have obstructed a telephone call to the President of the United States? Can you imagine? Shoot it off! Shoot with a gun! That's what the bullets are for, you twit!
Okay. I'm gonna get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's gonna happen to you?
What?
You're gonna have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
Yeah, Kubrick threw that thing in about the Coca-Cola Company in to remind the audience that this entire situation is absolutely absurd. However, that's where we need to bridge into another part of this video, and that right there is to talk about what this film is not. So let's talk about that. Many film critics and mostly liberal academics have come to the conclusion that Stanley Kubrick was this super anti-war guy, and you see this in films like Paths of Glory, Dr. Strangelove, and of course also Full Metal Jacket, a video that I have reviewed on this platform and will review again probably in the near future. Still, the point is this. When studying the film Full Metal Jacket, looking into the story notes, looking into the script writer, looking into the words of Michael Herr on Stanley Kubrick, one thing that was predominant was that Kubrick was trying to, in the case of that film, trying to show you more the audience what it was like being in war, the psychological toll that it takes on the men who serve in combat, and he was trying to simply do a film telling you basically what war is like. He wasn't anti-war according to Michael Herr, yet at the same time he, while not being fully opposed to war, was not pro-war. He understood why wars happen. The thing is this. Stanley Kubrick was not making a commentary on nuclear missiles in this particular film. What he was doing was he was satirizing the people that make the decisions whether to pull the trigger on nuclear war or not. The sexual inadequacies of General Ripper should have been the thing that sort of told the audience that this right here is more a film about inadequacy and paranoia, and of course also to go on top of that, creating excuses for said inadequacy or looking for someone to blame. Another film, and I talked about this earlier, I mentioned it earlier, was Paths of Glory. By the way, I did review that film not too long ago, and in that film, Kubrick was making more of a commentary on men, the men in charge, especially when they screw up, what they would do to not face any form of accountability. And in that case, there was historical precedent behind that film as well, given the fact that the French army from about 1917 to 1918 through the rest of World War I, they had a bit of a mutiny problem. Still, Dr. Strangelove was designed to make fun of those who would enter a dick measuring contest over something as crucial as nuclear war. Even, as said before, the Soviet leader is made out to look like an inadequate jackass. The goal has always been to strip humans down to their rawest form, and this is best seen in the case of General Turgedson. Turgedson is in love with his secretary, a woman who is clearly out of his league, and his insanity could be driven by her, given the fact that he secretly knows that she's too hot for him. He even acts as if to say that he knows, like I said before, that this woman is out of his league. But then that leaves us with the character of Dr. Strangelove himself and the Doomsday Device. So let's talk about Dr. Strangelove.
Mr. President, we must not allow a mine shaft gap.
Sir, I have a plan.
Monsieur, I can walk.
And before we move on, I just want to add one little more tidbit before we go any further. I don't think that Kubrick was trying to get political with this film at all, because clearly both sides of the spectrum are being made fun of here. Obviously, the more, let's just say, pro-military side is getting made fun of with the paranoia, that of course being in the character of General Turgedson, who, as mentioned before, is based largely off of General Curtis LeMay. And of course, as said before, while not physically looking the same, you have the president who is clearly not thinking when he chooses to allow the Russian ambassador into the war room, case in point.
Am I to understand that the Russian ambassador is going to be given access to the war room? I don't know quite how to put this, Mr. President, but do you realize what a severe breach of security that would be? I mean, he'll see everything here. I mean, he'll see the big board.
Basically making fun of both sides of the coin. That's what Kubrick was trying to do. So, no, Kubrick wasn't trying to assert anything political at all, but there's one more point that I want to make about General Turgedson before I close this video down. While it's true that you get crazy sequences like this,
Sir, if the pilot's good, see? I mean, if he's really sharp, he can barrel that baby in so low. I mean, you ought to see it sometime. It's a sight. A big plane like a 52.
Disarm it somehow?
No, it is designed to explode if any attempt is ever made to untrigger it.
Automatically?
It's an obvious comic trick, Mr. President. We're wasting valuable time.
The facial expressions of George C. Scott are meant to convey over to the audience that it is, quite frankly, frustrating dealing with somebody who does not understand the concept of national security, which is what you see in your president here, played by Peter Sellers. Still, it was also once again designed to make fun of how people tend to overreact when dealing with people who seem a little bit lackadaisical in their thinking. Once again, this was Kubrick making fun of both sides of the coin and not just one. I just figured I'd point that out before we close the video down. But moving on. Strangelove himself is based on sort of an amalgamation of the Nazi scientists that the U.S. employed post-World War II, Werner von Braun, for example, and it is funny how the old agenda of world domination or even ethnic cleansing can take a back seat to getting laid. I mean, even the Russian ambassador finds this prospect to be, quite frankly, appealing. More on him momentarily, but it's kind of funny to watch Dr. Strangelove fight the urge to basically throw his right arm up. It's almost like a teenage boy trying to hide, let's just say, the extension of his member in a science class.
Who stays up and who goes down?
Well, that would not be necessary, Mr. President. Could easily be accomplished with a computer. And the computer could be set and programmed to accept factors from youth, health, sexual fertility, intelligence, and a cross-section of necessary skills. Of course, it would be absolutely vital that our top government and military men be included to foster and impart the required principles of leadership and tradition. Actually, they would breed prodigiously, eh? There would be much time and little to do.
Once again, insert the inadequacy stuff all you want, because that's really sort of what this film is about, is men who, quite frankly, are inadequate with women, are having a hard time keeping their emotions in check. I mean, like I said before, it's a dick measuring contest, and pretty much every single interaction in this film, once again, is a dick measuring contest. Kubrick was making fun of the idea of this dick measuring contest playing out on a global stage, where millions of people, possibly billions, especially in today's world, could possibly die as a result of someone's stupidity. Or due to the fact that maybe they are somewhat inadequate, they feel the need to overcompensate. But in any case, the film ends with the bomb being dropped on the Soviets, and all this talk of the doomsday device makes you think that maybe the doomsday device does not exist, that maybe it's a bluff. But supposedly it's that doomsday device that goes off at the end, which kind of brings me to one last thing that needs to be pointed out before we go any further, and it goes back to General Turgedson. General Turgedson at times has gone out of his way to not only be paranoid of the Soviet Union, which of course was justifiable during the Cold War, but that paranoia suddenly becomes, well, let's just say in this little montage here, you see that General Turgedson has this habit to demean the Soviet ambassador and the Soviets as well.
If I may speak freely, the Rusky talks big, but frankly, we think he's short of know-how. I mean, you just can't expect a bunch of ignorant peons to understand a machine like some of our boys. And that's not meant as an insult, Mr. Ambassador. I mean, you take your average Rusky, we all know how much guts he's got. Hell, look at all of them Nazis killed off, and they still wouldn't...
Clumsy fool tried to plant that ridiculous camera on me.
Yeah, you bet your sweets, Mr. Commie. Look at this, Mr. President, this lousy commie rat. Mr. President, to imagine that these new developments are going to cause any change in Soviet expansionist policy. I mean, we must be increasingly on the alert to prevent them from taking over other mine shaft space in order...
And ultimately, it is General Turgedson's comments towards the Soviets that ultimately gets the Soviet ambassador to send a recording back to headquarters, and of course, you know the end of the film. I mean, seriously, it's kind of funny that the bombs would go off because someone was being petty and the other side couldn't take the jokes or the criticisms, but the entire world, for the most part, gets completely and totally destroyed. But I think that what Kubrick was trying to get at with the whole how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb, that right there is a separate conversation of its own that I will go ahead and touch now. I think it's Kubrick's way of making fun of the prospect of nuclear war itself, but more so the paranoia and the inadequacies of the men who would be in charge of the bomb should a situation arise. As said before, I know it feels like I might be beating you over the head with this, but I think that that's what Kubrick was trying to get across with that whole notion of how I learned to stop worrying and just embrace it. It's basically just trying to say, look, man, just go ahead and embrace the end. We'll all have a lot of fun as we go out. Hence the whole notion of bringing up 10 women per men, who, by the way, these men obviously, as said before, they obviously don't exactly look like the handsome, virile types. I mean, George C. Scott was 32 at the time of the filming of this movie, and of course, not even 5 years later on the set of Patton, he already looked like he had aged about 20 some odd years. Peter Sellers was not exactly a young man at the time of this film, but definitely a lot younger than the age 54 he was when he died in 1980. Yeah, the whole prospect of any of these old men having hot young ladies in the future and living inside of a bunker just seems absolutely ridiculous and absolutely insane. And I think that that's what Kubrick was, in a way, trying to get across to the audience, that most of the men who would be in charge or the men who would need nuclear weapons, in his eyes, he felt were inadequate and they were looking to overcompensate. But still, that leads us to Kubrick's technology warning, which, as I said before, I don't think that this film was a commentary on nuclear war and nuclear weapons, but more a commentary on the paranoia of such men that would be controlling the bomb. Still, I must end the video on this particular note. The technology warning is going to be a topic, or one of the three main topics, especially the fear of technology in the wrong hands. That will be heavily implied in the next film review, which will be on the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that theme of who's controlling the technology will also be very, very much involved in that video. I just figured I'd tip you off before we end this video. And with that out of the way, let me just go ahead and say thank you guys for watching. If you can, please hit the like button on the way out. Also, please consider subscribing. We've got more content coming out in the future. Let's make this channel much, much larger. If you guys can, please leave a comment in the comment section. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Tell me if you think I'm onto something. Just tell me what you think about the video essay as a whole. And also, one last time, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later.